Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ayu Azizah. Here I will explain you about global English. Happy watching. Why did English become the international language? That's the question we're going to answer today. English is the de facto global lingua franca. It is the language of global commerce, the main language of international diplomacy, is the language of air traffic control, and the majority of academic journals. And maybe most importantly for us, is the most common language on the internet, and is the language that international travelers with different native language use to communicate. The very definition of a lingua franca. But how did English reach this kind of status? Well, it's partly because of the United States of Americans rule as a global superpower. But the sun was set earlier than that. In the 19th century, England started to Anglophiles, overseas colonies, and by the end of the 18th century, the British Empire had grown quite extensive, with colonies in a few parts of India and Africa, in the Caribbean, Canada, and what was to become the United States. The British were not the only one establishing colonies, of course. Much of present-day Canada and the U.S. was part of New France, a large area that had been colonized by the French. But these areas were lost to the British during the 7 Years' War. And much of what is now the southern and western United States was colonized by the Spanish. But their areas were taken in wars with Spain and later Mexico. The Dutch had also colonized the area of New Netherlands. It was lost to the British in the late 7th century. There were also non-British immigrants to the British colonies. For example, German-speaking immigrants. For a long part of the USA's history, Germany was its second most widely spoken language. It declined its use during the First World War because of the stigma of being associated with Germany. So, while there were numerous languages spoken by settlers, English became the dominant language in the United States. The British gave on establishing colonies after American independence, including much larger areas of the Indian subcontinent and Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, and after the First World War in the Middle East. In 1922, the British Empire covered almost a quarter of the earth and about 1/5 of the world's population. Some of these countries became populated by English settlers. Those are the countries where English became the dominant language, replacing many others. Other countries were not populated by permanent settlers, only by administrative, military, and commercial personnel. Generally, in those countries, English did not become the single dominant language, but became a versatile language and a lingua franca. The world is in the mind of a COVID-19 pandemic, as WHO and partners work together on the response tackling the pandemic. advising on critical intervention, distributing vital medical supplies to those in need. They are racing to develop and deploy safe and active vaccine. Vaccines save millions of lives each year. Vaccines work by training and preparing the body's natural defenses, the immune system, to recognize and fight off the virus and bacteria they target. If the body is exposed to those disease-causing germs later, the body is immediately ready to destroy them, preventing illness. There are currently more than 50 COVID-19 vaccine candidates in trials. WHO is working in collaboration with scientists, business, and Global Health Organization, through the ACT accelerator to speed up the pandemic response. When a safe and active vaccine is found, COVAX, led by WHO, Gavi, and JP, will facilitate the equitable access and distribution of this vaccine to protect people in all countries. People most at risk will be prioritized while we work towards rolling out a safe and active vaccine fairly. We must continue the essential public health action to suppress transmission and reduce mortality.